Go ahead.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you again for your time, Benjamin, and in letting me have the floor during this summer school. I hope everything is going well and everyone's enjoying themselves. This is the second short talk of my sessions. I want to talk now about why RSE, and I'm sort of coming at this from two sides. So the title is Why Be an RSE, which is very much about the personal career choice that people probably in the summer school may be thinking of making. But I also tend to come at this from the more sort of systemic, why do we need RSEs in academia? Like, why should academia value and support RSEs? So that's the sort of frame that I'm using going forward. Again, so my name is Kim Martin. I'm a Software Sustainability Institute Fellow, and I've been trying to raise the profile of RSE in South Africa for the last couple of years. And then refresher from the last talk I gave on what is an RSE. So RSE, Research Software Engineer, is a term that was coined by the UK-based Software Sustainability Institute in 2012 on the recognition that research is increasingly dependent on software, and software in research requires people who combine professional software expertise with an understanding of research. And that's the sort of basic definition of a research software engineer, is someone who has software engineering skills, but also understands the research environment. That's not something that is typical of people who do software engineering in industry, is my understanding. So just to give things a little bit of a framing, this is now maybe I'm getting a little bit on my own personal soapbox. So a lot of this is my opinion, but it's also an opinion that's been shared with people I've spoken to in my last decade or so in academia. Things that I see as problems with traditional academic roles in academia in general. So again, I'm being very, very biased. I'm only looking at the cons, and there are definitely pros of being a traditional academic. But I would say that there are limited opportunities at the top, and makes sense because there are only so many professor level positions, and there are many, many more people in junior academic roles, postdocs, and all the rest of it, who may initially at least enter academia believing that they want to become professors. And the irony is that even the people who are the most skilled and the most passionate researchers, the people who do become professors, they then typically find themselves sort of in this bait and switch scenario where instead of now doing more of the research that they, got into that role for and are so skilled at, they then find themselves becoming basically full-time grant writers, trying to support a growing team of researchers underneath them, writing student grants and things like that. So the sort of irony of like, you get a professor role because you're a good researcher and you're skilled at what you do and you love it, and then you end up not being able to actually do the thing that you really love. Again, part of the sort of typical thing seems to be that academics are generally perpetually chasing funding. Academics below the sort of top echelons tend to suffer from just career uncertainty. So, I mean, a typical thing if you're a postdoc, for example, is you'll be chasing multiple short-term positions, like 1 year, 3 years at a time. And in each of those positions, you need to, as much as possible, fill out your CV to get the next position and the next position, eventually with the aim of trying to get into, say, a professor level position. And again, part of that uncertainty and the sort of multiple short-term contracts that is the norm for postdocs particularly, is it's very, very difficult to settle down in one geographic location, particularly in the early years. And this is more of a problem for people who want to try and balance their career with a more sort of conventional life. So people who, for example, want to have children, have to start thinking in terms of like, needing a more stable supply of income. They need to be in one place long enough to put kids in school, and they need to worry about their partner's employment as well. They can't just up and leave to the other side of the world. So these are things to think about if you're at an early stage in your career and are at the moment thinking about the more traditional academic role. And then something that I mean, may not be a downside depending on your perspective, but I think it may be a downside that often your skills and your focus in academia become very, very niche. So you become very focused on something that is maybe, very important, but at the same time, not very many employers maybe care about it. The skills are very limited. Maybe you can only work in sort of very expensively outfitted labs. So this kind of thing can limit your employment options. And then something that is, again, very much part of my own personal perspective, but I believe that it's typical traditional academia seems to do a lot of the work in silos. So I don't believe that academia emphasizes the value of team science enough. And in my experience, it is typical for especially junior researchers to do the majority of their work effectively alone. So this being the case, they miss out opportunities for learning and collaboration. And they also, I mean, when it comes to learning how to work in a team is itself an important skill that translates, to any given work environment. And if you cannot do it, if you cannot play well in teams, you are definitely limiting the options for your future. And thinking now more on a sort of systemic level, I think that when RSEs are not part of the academic ecosystem, a lot of waste happens when it comes to the sort of software side of research. So, for example, there's a lot of reinventing of the wheel with regard to software tools. I say badly written software gets rewritten. So when you have, say, a PhD student or a postdoc who is not given the support to develop themselves into an RSE role, for example, maybe they don't want to become an RSE, but they would benefit from working with an RSE. People like that left to their own devices tend to do the best they can, which is often not really good enough. And then that software, which has been taken a lot of time and by extension money to get created, then at the end of a particular project is probably going to get put in the bin. If it needs to be used again, someone else is probably going to end up trying to rewrite the thing. Inefficient software, so this is software that is maybe not being written by someone with enough skill to have the algorithms that run fast enough or fast as they could. This is maybe more of a problem when people start doing much larger things with big data. And it can be a problem when things take longer than necessary, especially when there's money on the line. Incorrect software. So again, I was talking about retractions yesterday. But if you don't have to think too hard to think about there are worse things than retractions that could result from research software that is not doing the job it should, especially if that software then goes beyond the research environment, but that's another story. And then also not taking full advantage of the power of software. So doing things manually and taking the time to do them, whereas a smart piece of software could actually do the job, save people time, and save them the cognitive capacity to do other things with their brain. So I've had this experience myself long before my PhD of having to do a lot of manual counting of things in microscopy images, because the software just wasn't quite there to do the thing automatically. And actually thinking about it, knowing what I know now, I could have automated that process. So again, refreshing the memory from what I was talking about yesterday, or what does an RSE do? And this is now again that screenshot from the keynote talk where I first heard the term research software engineer, and I saw this sort of slide, and these kind of things appealed to me. I was already doing a lot of them, but as I say, I talked about the Software Sustainability Institute's manifesto, how all researchers should have access to basic software training. Software should be accepted as a valid research output, and there should be reward and recognition for the people who develop and maintain research software, as in RSEs. And again, the kind of things that RSEs can help with, they can help with code review to reduce the reputation risk of errors. They can help improve code, which reduces that problem of reinventing the wheel that I mentioned. And they can help train researchers so that the researchers can go further by themselves without actually then needing the RSE to do the work for them. Or they can maybe get as far as developing a good prototype of what they really need, so they could then hand it over to an RSE and communicate as peers as to what needs to be done next. And again, the advantages: do research better, more success in grants, more fame, less notoriety, all good things. And in the context of this increasing move to open science, where the expectation is increasingly that all the source code should be made available for other people to inspect and potentially build on. Now, when I was talking in terms of RSE as an alternative academic career, first focusing on the pros, Now, these are, again, very personal things. You may or may not see these as a pro in a choice of career. And if you see these as pros, then maybe you should think quite strongly about RSE. So RSEs tend to enjoy helping researchers and advancing research that way. RSEs tend to benefit from getting exposure to many different research fields. So depending on where they're located and who they work with, they may find themselves working across different disciplines, geosciences, medicine, chemistry, physical sciences, but botanical ecosystem stuff, anything that you can think of that a researcher might be wanting help with in terms of getting a piece of software to help them advance their work. You could then start learning. Hello? I'm just going to keep going unless I'm told to stop. You could find yourself being exposed to many different fields. You can focus on developing technical expertise in software engineering, valuable skills. You can develop skills in communicating with client and collaborator researchers from different disciplines. Again, very valuable skills. And as I said, you tend to have opportunities to work in more of a team science environment rather than being a lonely, do everything yourself solo researcher. And to try and balance the sort of scale a little bit, talking about the cons, it is still a relatively unknown role, at least in South Africa so far. It can be lonely if you aren't part of a community, but that would be why I would suggest strongly that you find community, and there are communities available, including one for in Africa. And it can be hard in places to get promotion where there aren't career metrics that are geared towards RSE. So where the career metrics are more focused on researchers, so for example, how many publications have you got? Or alternatively, where they're focused towards traditional non-RSE support staff, which is typically like how many people are you managing, whereas an RSE would be trying to focus more on the quality of the software they're producing. But all of this is changing and improving with time, thanks to the efforts of an international community of RSEs and their supporters. And just again, a quick refresher about an RSE groups I spoke about yesterday. So RSE groups comprise of a number of RSEs who work for researchers across an organization. So it'll be a group of RSEs in a university who work for researchers maybe in all disciplines. And this is now just to highlight that working in silos is not something that you're immune to if you're an RSE. It is possible for RSEs to be isolated, maybe even unrecognized, not sort of called something else, not called an RSE. And if they're working in service units and research groups spread across different faculties by themselves, there's a loss there. There's opportunities for cross-disciplinary learning and collaboration that are not being realized in that context. So this is something to pay attention to, and why RSE groups, I think, are such a valuable construct. And as I said, I mentioned yesterday, I have been taking time to learn from the existing RSE groups in the UK, where I did this RSE road trip, visited 14 different universities and 25 different groups and interviewed over 100 people. And some of the things that I was learning during this process, one of the things that I learned was the diversity of RSE origins. So many RSEs actually didn't come from academia or had left academia for time in industry and then returned. And this industry experience was often very valuable. Another thing that I picked up was that different people want different things. I mean, this is sort of like a obviously thing, but at the same time, it's good to actually get the clear picture from talking to people. And people wanted very different things. Some of them wanted to stay in an RSE role and not think about the academic side of things or grant funding or whatever. And there is a place for people like that in these RSE groups. But some people also wanted the ability to move back into a more traditional academic role, or alternatively to move to industry. And as I said, some RSE groups actually encourage this. So they recruit people with the understanding that they would be using the RSE group as a platform for moving on to something in industry later. And just to highlight this, I personally see RSE as a pathway to other opportunities that for many, many people, increasingly so going forward. So of the people that I'd spoke to during my road trip, I met quite a number of people who hadn't been RSEs. They had learned about the role when they joined an RSE group, and they'd come from industry. They hadn't come from academia. And the people I spoke to were willing to earn what were typically lower salaries in academia compared to industry in exchange for more interesting and more meaningful work and better quality of life. These were the things that people kept on telling me again and again who fell into this category. But equally so, RSEs do develop skills that are valued in industry. And I think this is going to be more the case as RSEs become more well-known in industry. So moving from an RSE role in academia to then later on follow a more lucrative career in industry is increasingly possible. Just a little thing in terms of like progress. There is progress in recognizing the importance of RSE. I just put up this one thing here, and it's actually a couple of years old now, but a Nature sort of Q&A paper. But there's been a number of other publications that I could throw up as well, showing how RSE as a role is being better defined. The paths to get into an RSE role are being better defined. The kind of things that RSE should know are being more and more clarified. I'll be talking about that kind of thing more tomorrow. And yeah, I think it's very much the sort of the moment is here for this as a career option. So just to say, my next talk is tomorrow, and I'm going to talk more about how to develop a career as an RSE. So for now, my thanks to my supporters, the Software Sustainability Institute, the RSE community, my bosses, NETEX, CHPC, and giving me this platform. And thank you everyone for your time. And yeah, again, as I said yesterday, I would encourage you to join the RSE communities, both the national or actually in the African continent one, the RSE Africa, and also the international RSE Slack. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for that talk, Kim. I think we all appreciate it, and the topic is very relevant in today's climate. I just wanted to ask a question. You said, obviously in research we're expected to publish papers, and submit to journals. Is there a mechanism for code or kind of publish code to somewhere other journals that actually accept code that's can be published as well?
Yeah, there are, I'm trying to recall now the name, I think it's JOS. There are examples of publications that specifically accept software. So basically the publication itself is just this little, can you see that still?
Yeah.
Yep, there we go. So JOS is one example. The publications themselves are basically a very sort of brief explanation about the thing, but the main point is to submit the code itself and make it available. And one of the advantages of, I think I've spoken to the people who are actually involved in JOS, and one of the real exciting things about it is that your code gets peer reviewed, which is, I think something that's going to happen more and more, but I think it's quite a good opportunity to actually upskill yourself when you're in the process of submitting, to have the editors of the journal come back to you and give you pointers on how to improve your code, how to improve the packaging of your code. So yeah, I'd recommend people look at this as one way. There is a sort of, I think within the RSE community, there seems to be a sort of split in perspective. Some people are trying to push for ways that RSEs can fit more into the typical academic model. So finding ways like JOS, for example, for RSEs to publish and get their publication metrics up there. I think other RSEs, though, are more pushing back against that and saying that RSEs shouldn't try to mold themselves as academics. They should be judged for what it is they do. I'm a bit on the fence. I think JOS is great, for example, and I think it seems like a win-win.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kim, and we look forward to your talk tomorrow. Thank you.
I think I'm breaking up a little bit. Can you hear me?